Hey guys, this is Color from Chronology Gaming.
Okay, this is another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this one is going to be FMPONE. FMPONE, how do you actually say that?
Yeah, well, I typically just tell people however they want, but yeah, FMPONE is usually what I use.
Okay, right. So, the man who most of the people watching this obviously are hardcore CS players, so most famously known for collaborating on the map Cache with Volcano, the former 1.6 Pro. So, let's start there. Like, even though you have created other maps, some that have even been used in competitive play and at tournaments that people would have seen pro players playing at, let's start with Cache, because that's the first place I ever heard about you. I think that's the first place you kind of got some fame to some degree. How did you get involved with making Cache? Like, how did you hook up with Volcano in that sense? Because I know that actually early in CSGO, he was already involved with making the special editions of some of the maps, which I know a lot of the people listening right now won't remember. But in early CSGO, before the majors, actually the competitive community had their own special edition versions of maps where they tweaked certain things for competitive play, which sounds like a great idea, right, everyone out there? So that sounds like, wow, wouldn't that be cool? But unfortunately, then Valve came along and said, yeah, those don't exist anymore, and we went back to the retail map. So how did you actually get involved with making Cache, a beloved CSGO map?
Yes, well, it's a great question. I think you do have to start there. So I was watching professional tournaments where people were playing Cache, and I just noticed a couple of things right off the bat. In terms of the simplicity of the layout, which does not mean anything negative. It's actually one of the highest compliments you can give a competitive layout. I noticed some iconic spaces in terms of the vent room, in terms of A main, and just the entire A bomb site. So some red flags went off for me. I was saying, okay, this is not your average map. This is something with a lot of potential. The fact that it was already being played by professionals did set it apart from many of the other maps in the community.
Sure.
So yes, but you know, the funny thing is with Cache, it wasn't about remaking Cache. It was about working with Volcano. It was about working with Sal more than anything, because actually the original plan was not to remake Cache first. It was to work on an original map first. I think I just had a sense that this was somebody I could learn a lot from, and I think I was absolutely correct about that.
Okay. What actually was your involvement in Cache tonight? Is there any specific things that you came up with, or something you changed, or some kind of, epiphany you came to regarding the map?
Well, I mean, I could sit here and talk about some of the things I did, but I think it's a lot more important to talk about the original creator's overall vision for the map and how I was able to solve some of the problems along the way in sort of realizing that vision.
Okay.
So some of the things I did are pretty minor. Like there was a ladder at B Heaven, which
Okay.
I sort of felt like it didn't really need to be there. It was going to create more problems than it was going to solve as a design element.
That's not so minor for competitive play. If you could get up there from inside the site, right? That's pretty big.
Yeah, I guess I'm just not interested in making my own contributions to that map seem like some major thing. I mean, they're subtle tweaks to what I think is a fantastic design, fundamentally fantastic design.
Okay. So actually, the thing is, I didn't play Source, so I have never played Cache before CSGO, and I knew it had some history in Source. I mean, if you go look at it, it's a pretty different map to some degree, and obviously the CSGO. One of the things we found is even if you make the layout the same, obviously the engine of CSGO is very different. So, did you actually play Source? Did you know the map before you encountered it in CSGO?
I ran around Season in Source. In Source, I did not run around Cache, and I was unfamiliar with it. However, in the development process for Cache, I did do research about that map, and there were things that I said, we should bring this back. The boost spot, the shroud spot, that was something that Sal had done in Source, but it was kind of not implemented in the CSGO port. And I felt like that was something that was going to have potential for competitive play. And, thankfully he agreed. And that was one of the great things about working with Sal, is it felt like when we had like a rational, cool idea, he was just so open-minded and flexible with cool ideas like that.
Okay, so you also collaborated with him on Crown, which is a map that unfortunately a lot of people aren't going to be aware of. I mean, it's not something that in tournaments has ever been used. Just initially, Like, what was the concept going into Crown? Was it that were you thinking that it could be another cache and it could get in the map pool and kind of like, you know, this could become a more serious thing in that respect?
Yes. Crown was a humbling experience, which is kind of ironic given the name. The basic mistake that we made with Crown, excuse me, and one that will never be repeated as long as I'm conscious, is that we didn't playtest the map enough. And It's a simple mistake to make. I hope it's a lesson for people out there that you definitely do need to be playtesting and focusing on the players and what players think. It's okay to have ambitions and goals and objectives that you want to achieve. But if players aren't on the same page, it's just going to fail.
Does the fact that the map didn't live up to the same expectations then, has that halted the partnership with Volcano? Is there still plans to make more maps with him? Is there a plan? Are the future plans, specifically like the end goal is get maps into competitive play?
Well, one of the nice things about Sal is that, you know, he just has like this calm temperament, and I think from being a professional player and competing at the highest level in 1.6 and Source, he has a maturity that is really valuable, especially when things maybe don't go as well. So I think we could have worked through the problems with Crown. We could have continued to iterate on that map. I think when you don't play test early in the process, when you don't release a gray box, which is what I've done for my last few projects, you put yourself in a very difficult position, because then you have to go back and not only change a layout that's affected by the basic design of the map, but the art as well. And that's increasing the difficulty by factors of magnitude. So for that reason, I think we both sort of decided like maybe someday, but probably not. And I think what ended up happening is he got a job at Riot Games, and that, you know, sort of encouraged me to go off and to do my own projects, and sort of encouraged him to succeed as a professional.
Okay. So when you say that idea of like having it more play tested and essentially, you know, release more things before you even get the map out, so at least people could maybe give you feedback, or hey, I'm thinking of this. That's something I wanted to know, because actually a big problem I have with the concept of any kind of like design or balance is that, okay, this is just as someone who's a rank amateur, and in my own areas, let's say I have creative components, I'm kind of applying some of my own philosophy, might not fit, we'll see, is that in general, I tend to find that the best creative ventures do tend to be directed by like a singular vision. Like if you have like one kind of core thing set in mind, and then from that you let that, let's say a philosophy, and that informs all the other decisions you make. And the more consistent you can make that, I generally think the more coherent a thing you come out with at the end. Now the problem with that when you work on anything that's more than one person is obviously then you got to find people who are on your wavelength or who they think similarly to you, and like it's very, very tough. And so for example, even though I will be very critical of Valve when I think they've done a bad design, I'm not one of those people who just says, you know what, just go ahead and listen to every pro player. They know better than you. Because actually, I think we've all heard the famous saying about like how things are like a camel is a horse designed by committee. It's a great quote, right? The problem is when you let a lot of competing voices in, listen, some of those ideas are good, some of them probably shit. So I've heard some great suggestions from pro players for fixing maps. I've heard some that I really just thought, maybe you just play that spot on that map, mate, and you just want to make it easy, you know. How do you weigh up what criticism to take, what feedback to take? Because obviously you want it, but at the same time, it's hard to gauge, right, what's useful.
Yeah, well, you just asked, how do you be a level designer? Because that's all it is. It's just listening to feedback. And so you do have to have an ear for not just, like, for instance, to give you an example, Sal was speaking with Fifth Lauren about cash. Now, if you were to go by the community's standards of a professional player, you would be an elitist and you wouldn't listen to somebody like Fifth Lauren. But Fifth Lauren is an incredibly intelligent person.
Sure. Yeah.
And so he had some really great feedback for cash. Like, as a matter of fact, the boost spot, it used to be the boost spot on cash, which is to the right from T-spawn. Yeah. It used to be that you would be boosted up by a teammate onto the boost spot, and then you would have to jump up again onto some boxes. Okay. And Fifth Lauren said, you know, guys, that should just be a ramp. And Sal was doing his job as a level designer and listening. And I thought it was a great suggestion. So we implemented it. And that's just an example of how you really have to just focus on what is being said and the merit of the idea, and try to take, obviously if a professional player gives you feedback, that's very valuable. But it could be just some random person on Reddit who has the right idea.
Okay. So since you've kind of taken it down this direction, I want to kind of get your take as someone who's involved in the level design or who saw Cash evolve, in terms of how players have used it, because I always think that is the one area I have a lot of sympathy for actually everyone who designs games or levels, which is that truthfully you can never really know what a player's going to do with it or how they'll exploit it. And for example, just to give a very simple kind of general case, there are actually times where in the early days of like a level or a map, it's very imbalanced in one respect. And actually, if you were at that moment to listen to people and then to say, you got to change this right here, it's super overpowered, what you wouldn't realize is 3 months later, someone figures out a counter to that either neutralizes it or goes imbalanced the other way. And I've seen ridiculous examples of this with guns, with levels, with champions in games, So in that kind of respect, how do you take on board what's happening in pro play? Because obviously, I mean, to give you an example on Cash, I remember when the map first came into pro play in Europe, so it had already been in ESEA, but actually I think one of the first tournaments was, I think it was Gfinity, G3, it was an event in August of 2014. It's one of the first tournaments I remember seeing Cash at, and at this LAN, the map was super CT-sided. Like, any really good team got on CT side, they just bashed everyone's head in, no one knew how to do a good T attack, and anyone listening to this right now who's a modern player would laugh at that, like, so you couldn't do any T attacks. Like, this is a map where terrorists nowadays can abuse CTs if they know what they're doing. You've got all the molly spots, you've got all the flash, there's so much you can do, but at the time no one had figured out any of the basics of the meta. So, is it tricky in that respect? How do you kind of approach that? The fact that, initially you kind of release something out into the world, it's being used, let's say, I mean, I'll be kind of hyperbolic here, in the wrong way, people are abusing it, but don't you have to kind of like wait and see to some degree? What's that like?
Oh yeah. Well, just the other day, Body did this crazy wall bang through.
Oh, don't worry, I've got a video that came out just now, mate, complaining about it. Don't worry, I think it's bullshit. But okay, yeah, keep going.
Well, it's just an example of something that you're probably not going to anticipate as a level designer.
Look, you can't, obviously.
Yeah, it's just there's too many variables. But actually, as a matter of fact, with the new levels I'm working on, with Santorini, this was something that we thought about. With Sub-Zero, it's something that we're thinking about. You definitely want to think about 100 steps ahead and make sure that the map actually does have depth and actually is going to be interesting and actually will provide some material from Reddit cooked in. Just interesting plays, just things that players can do to change rounds that, makes it more fun. That's what it really is just about, is like when you see somebody get a crazy wall bang through mid, that's just fun. I don't know.
Okay. Depends which side of the wall bang you're on, really. Okay, I've got a question for you. How much actual pro play do you follow? Like, do you keep up to date with what's going on with the maps and how they're being played, etc.?
Yes.
Okay, so then I've got a question for you. So I kind of laid out there that the history of Cash, it started as this very CT-sided map. If anyone wants to see a famous game like this, go to the tournament I'm talking about, Gfinity G3, and it was one of the first times that Dignitas, basically the core of what's Astralis now, beat NIP, and all they do is just completely shit all over them on CT side, and it's like the end of the game already. So there's like where it started, but it wasn't that long after. We're talking a few months later that probably the most significant evolution of the map happened, which was Virtus Pro figured out that if you abuse mid control and you do these boosts we're talking about, and you figure out the smokes, then first of all, it's the reason why, for me, I think it's a nightmare to play that mid spot as CT. It becomes very difficult, First of all, the terrorists have to obviously put a lot of their focus there with utility, but then the CTs have to really figure out how they're going to counter that. Like, what did you think of that evolution? Like, is that something you could have anticipated? What do you think of it in terms of, like, was it healthy? What's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, it's totally natural. I mean, for instance, Dust 2, think about all the ways that people have innovated on that layout, which is, you would think there's not a lot of room to innovate, but sure. You have like the NOA boost going back to 1.6 where people just figured out like, oh, I can watch double doors by standing on somebody else's head, and think about all the implications for the meta that one variation in tactic introduced.
Okay. So then here's the interesting part, is that for me, the next evolution of the game, which is actually a very bizarre one, because it's going to tie into where cash is today as a map, which is that when Virtus.pro kind of brought about that map control meta, everyone else, as they do with anything powerful in the meta, just got this like ridiculous paradigm of like, right, this is the only way you play the map. You have to do this. You have to take mid control, and then also, I will take mid control. You've got to use smokes and so. Well, actually, one of the all-time great cash teams, I included them, I think, on my like top 20 list of like most dominant maps ever. Like, yeah, Virtus.pro was in there, but one of the teams that was higher than them on cash is actually the Envious lineup. It was the French guys, Shocks, Happy, MBK. Now, first of all, NBK himself, he almost should be like the third designer on this map. I feel like this guy, like the amount of stuff like that he invented just inside the game. I mean, that had to be interesting in itself, right? He came up with all these smashes, all these flashes, Molotovs, smokes. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, there's an MBK spot. I've at least been actively searching for him to make like a crazy play from that spot in a major. Not that I would do it
to get the graffiti.
Just saying it was
okay.
It would really be full circle. But yeah, no, that guy is brilliant. Nathan is definitely an amazing player, and it's just fun to watch players like that play the map. So, I mean, to go back to your question, like what do I think about the way that a team like Envious innovates on a map like Cash? I mean, that's really what it's all about, right? These are professional players. They're being put into a competitive environment, and this is the environment. How do they react? That's what we are watching to see as spectators.
Because what I'm leading into here, right, is that basically the thing that Envious found, which is really bizarre when you consider before, like I said, it was a map about teamwork and it was about great CT setups. They basically became like the best T-side team, and what they actually learned amazingly was that if you have really skilled players and you know what angle to watch, you can actually essentially use no utility. You can just walk out without smokes. You actually don't even have to take mid control. You can just attack either side just separately. And the problem with that is like that to some degree is carried over. And at the moment, now that Dust 2 is gone, I don't know if you're aware of this, but people call Cash the new Dust 2 because if you ever play Face It or something, it's Cash they want to go to because
that's horrible news.
I know that's my point is okay. Is that, to a level designer, you don't necessarily care in that sense what they think of it. It's just that they play the map. But
sure.
People think of Cash now, believe it or not, as mainly a skill map. They don't think of it as much as like the execute map with utility and stuff. They think of it actually as like it's the map where if you have the more skilled aimers, you want to play Cash. What do you think of that?
Well, it's a great question. I don't tell players what to think about a map. I listen. And if this is something that players feel long term is unacceptable, then of course we will consider it. But I think players love Cash, and players are really, the map is like thriving right now. So that's just a subjective determination. However, I think the data does back that up as well. Okay.
So since Cash is in competitive play, and like I mentioned, it was even in a past version of Counter-Strike, when you look at the problems that happened with Crown and the fact that, you had hopes of it being a competitive map, of it getting out there. I mean, I guess it also applies to Santorini when that got introduced. Here's what I want to know. Aside from the literal case of what happened with those maps, what is the actual process of getting a map into the active duty? What has to happen from the day you finish the map and the day it enters active duty? What happens between then? Like, obviously, plebs like us don't know.
Well, I mean, I think in a certain sense, I think it's the wrong question to ask. I think the question is, how do you design a map that players will love and that players will respond to, and that, I mean, Cash has been around for, I think, almost 10 years. So
okay.
When I design a map like Santorini, when we play test it for endless hours, of course you think to yourself, well, gee, it would be great, if this map would enter the active duty pool. And I do think that there should be a community map pool if that's not going to be feasible. However, the main goal and what I focus on, and when I've failed, it's because I've lost sight of this, is just simply that you have to focus on making a fun map, making a map that players like and that players respond to. And if you try to get in your head about the long-term goals it's great to have goals, but it's not so great to lose sight of what you're actually supposed to be doing, which is making players happy.
Okay, but be that as it may, subjectively, you and me could think that Crown is the best map ever, and we could think it's fantastic. But at the end of the day, this is kind of what I'm alluding to the question. Someone at Valve presumably has to agree, or there's some sort of process involved with how they decide that a map comes in. So is it based kind of on what you're saying here? Is there some sort of community feedback that they go off? Is there some sort of number of likes or something? How does it even get into kind of the discussion that it can be an active duty?
Right. Well, I think you'd have to ask Valve that to an extent. I'd try not to speak to them. But I mean, Cash was a legendary.
What do you mean you try
map.
not to speak to them? Surely you should be fucking skywriting outside their houses, calling them up all day. What do you mean you try not to speak to them? What does that mean?
I try not to speak for them.
Okay.
For them.
Okay.
For them. I love speaking with them at every opportunity I get because they are just very intelligent people. But
give me your best guess then.
What do I think it takes? It takes a legendary map. It takes a map like Cash that one of the most important North American professionals in 1.6 and Source designed, that the community responded to overwhelmingly, that people genuinely like to play. So, I mean, those are all goals that I set for myself as a level designer on projects like Santorini or Sub-Zero.
Okay.
And there are things that I aim for, but I do think you have to be humbled before 10 years of a map's experience and existence to not say, oh yeah, I just released the map. It's really cool. People like it. Okay, can I go in active duty now?
Okay. So, without having to go and get the sodium pentothal, let me put it this way. Volcano helped design Crown. He is a veteran player who helped design blah, 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 all the rest of it. But Crown isn't in the active duty pool. So, maybe I can reframe it another way. How does a map that isn't in the active duty get popular and well-liked enough that someone like Valve could even notice that it's a map that people care about and then potentially include it in the active map duty? I mean, put it this way, I only heard about Crown through news, and then I saw like some articles about it. Like if I'd just been a random player and I just play matchmaking, I don't know if I ever would have encountered it, So how do you think that you can even get people's attention in that respect for a map that isn't yet in active duty?
Well, this is now my challenge as a level designer with projects like Santorini or Sub-Zero, because now I say to myself, well, am I supposed to just stop because, I've had one map in the active duty pool? I mean, I'd like to see professionals playing maps like Santorini or Sub-Zero, and I think we've seen that, and it's gone, pretty well. So I guess to answer your question, when I think about what it would take to be considered for the active duty pool, it's all the things that I focus on every day when I'm working, about quality, about making the map run well, about making the map look great, about having a new original meta for the professional players and spectators. So I think about all those factors, and those are the things that keep me up late at night, just working hard to make a map that can be as great as something like Cash, because it does go back to quality, in my opinion.
Barring some sort of miracle, does the process of what has happened with releasing Crown and then it not becoming an active duty map, does that likely mean the ship has sailed on it becoming an active duty map, and now you've got to go to future projects?
It's just interesting that you're mentioning Crown so much, because it's not a map that it seems like you're curious about it, and that's very healthy. But it's many years ago now for me, so my head is beyond that.
So then for you the ship has sailed.
Well, yes. I think it would be cool to one day revisit it, maybe with Source 2 or something like that. And I definitely think with everything that I've learned from, you have to study failures. It's a failure, and it's very important to look back on that project and meditate on the reasons that it didn't succeed.
Have you come to a couple of them? Can you give us a couple of conclusions of what you think didn't work?
Well, yeah, it's just basically what I said before. You don't play test the map, you're gonna have a bad time. And so I think the reasons that we didn't play test it is not arrogance. We weren't sitting there saying, we don't respect players, we're not going to test this map, we're going to ship it and players are going to like it. The reasons that the map did not get play tested as much as it should have was a technical consideration. I was not as experienced as with the editor as I am today. So I did not have the ability to get the product ready for playtesting at an early enough stage. And the consequences of that are dire. And unless you're capable of completely thinking through the entire implications of every design decision you make, and you don't run those by players, and you don't test your assumptions, you're going to have a bad time.
Okay. If we contrasted you against anyone else making maps for CSGO who also, wants them potentially to have a competitive use, having Volcano on your side, I mean, that's like an easy in to potentially get playtesters and to get maybe some pros to playtest it. Now that you're not necessarily working with him on the newer maps, do you have those connections yourself? Is it easy enough to get that sorted out? Or is that something that you're missing since you don't have Volcano by your side?
Well, a little psychology lesson. It's not that easy to get playtesters, but we named our group the Secret Playtesting Group, and all of a sudden everybody wanted in.
Okay. So that's not a concern going forwards that a map will not be playtested enough. That won't be a limiting factor.
No, it's not. It's not a concern for me. I work with a group of semi-pro players. In the past, I've compensated my playtesters, included them in the proceeds for the map.
Okay.
So I really value playtesting. I think it's very important. My main playtester guy that I deal with right now is a guy by the name of Connor JC. He's like a semi-pro player. He doesn't take it that seriously. But I think what's great about Connor is that he is a representative of the everyman of Counter-Strike. He's sort of he's a great simulacrum, or however the hell you say that word, for the typical Counter-Strike player, the typical CSGO player. So I think it's been very useful to get his feedback on Sub-Zero.
Okay, so a map we haven't really touched on much yet is Season, and this is a map where obviously, again, it has its own history as a map, but an interesting detail to this one is, to me, this is between the extremes. Okay, so the ideal map is to have a map like Cash that's well loved, it works, it maintains quality throughout the competitive years. On the other end of the scale, you've got, like, for example, Crown, that you tried to do that, but whatever reason it didn't break through. For me, Season's in the middle, because it was used in some ESEA seasons, actually. People can go and watch. There was a game that, it was at season 18, I remember, that Virtus Pro played a game against Fnatic, and actually Olafmeister got like an ace or something on the map. And this is the map where it's very kind of science-y. It's very Half-Life in that sense, like the layout's kind of more sci-fi than a lot of CS maps I've seen. But it didn't manage to make the jump from that. It was used in the ESEA seasons, and unfortunately, obviously, ESEA doesn't have its own life now. It's part of ESL, and so it's more of a unified system. And it never made the jump to the European lands in the way that Cash did, and into the full-on kind of competitive map pool. What do you make of Season in that respect? Because to some degree, it was a success, right?
Yes, I think, Ted McElwain is the original designer of Season. He designed it back in Counter-Strike Source. I looked around at it back in the day, way back in the day, in Counter-Strike Source, unlike Cash, because I loaded it up. I said, this looks like a cool map. So I've always felt a connection to Season, and I've always liked that map. And I think players really like that map, and I think the reception to the CSGO remake kind of did exceed our expectations quite a bit. Personally, I think it would be cool to see more updates to Season. I think Ted he's considering it. He's maybe working on some stuff, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens moving forward with that map.
One of the problems whenever a map comes out is that I notice the maps that are often rejected by pro players are the ones where either the concept, like the way you play the map, at least initially, is a little bit too alien, or it's just too dissimilar to other maps. So as a result, they don't come in with kind of any like vocabulary, as it were, as to how to play the map. Season, to me, I've played it a few times. I've seen a few games on it. It is a little bit confusing to me. Can you outline what do you think works about the map? What is different about it from other maps? Sure,
absolutely. So I think what makes Season different from a map like Cash or Dust 2 or Mirage, maybe one of the it's more of a family of in that lineage.
Okay.
I think what makes it different is the amount of strategies you can do. On Season, it's just endless. Like, you can just run so many different strategies. You can do a B hit, you can do a person through mid, it's just the endless amount of variety that the map offers. I think in terms of things that the map could be improved about or could improve upon is the size of the map. I think that's a concern for a lot of people. But yeah, I think it just goes, the main thing is not even necessarily the specifics or the details about this thing is wrong or this thing is great. What it is you need to have a philosophy of being open to player suggestion and being open to playtesting, gathering feedback, and iterating. And if you have that mentality, I really think that the specifics and the details can all be overcome in time.
So I feel like a really difficult creative tension that lives within making maps that ever will have a competitive play. Like, it's different if you want to have it just as a public map, and obviously in the original history of CS, that's all maps originally were, you know, before. It's actually the competitive community who came and took these maps and decided they're ours, and they're not, we're just borrowing them from whoever made Dust and all the rest of it, you know. But one of the big tensions I notice is that when people do make a map just for public play, or back in the Quake days, you made them for single player, you know. When people make a map, yeah, it's an artistic thing. They think of it as a canvas. They want to show off, you know, their technical skill. They want to do something maybe no one has ever done before, or add in all these extra details. And so kind of the temptation is make it really fancy, do lots of crazy shit, have like lots of secret passages and all extra ways into the bomb site. But the problem is, if you look, and we're talking about, for example, Dust 2 is a very famous example of this, that's an extremely simple map. And actually, that's one of the things that people who like Dust 2 love about the map. And in fact, if you look at Dust 2, you'd have to say, you know, the guy almost didn't get that much opportunity. It's a lot of long, just open slopes without doors. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of like little intricate details. So as someone who, when you're working on maps, what is that tension like? Is it difficult? Is it something you embrace? Do you like it? What's your philosophy? If it's going to go into competitive, should it be very simple? Can it have kind of a little bit, can it be flowery?
Well, I think Valve is exploring this with canals to a certain extent. In my history of CSGO, I started out more complicated, more different ideas, more elevation changes. And if there's been a change in my philosophy, it's entirely as a result of focusing on the players and focusing on what they seem to respond to. So I will tell you, without question, simple is hard to do. It may seem easy, it may seem elementary. It's far from those things. For instance, Sub-Zero map that we've been developing the gray box for that map for over a year, because I just know how important it is to get to simple. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of thinking and consideration. And it's almost like you're designing an algorithm or something that kind of machine learns how to get to the right optimal pathing on everything and the right timings. So it's incredibly difficult to create a simple layout, at least one that is actually fun to play.
One thing about CSGO that I actually like more than 1.6, so this will shock people already, like there's already, you know, bated breath there, how can that be that there's something I like more, is actually, even though in general, I'm not as much of a fan of the graphics of CSGO, because what I actually liked about 1.6 is if you're a pro player, the visibility is excellent because it's a very simple game. And there's obviously a lot of visual clutter in CSGO. There's stuff everywhere, you know, on the walls and stuff. But one thing that actually, as a result, unexpectedly ended up being great about that is that famously now, the way that we're able to get consistent smokes and flashes and some of these crazy smokes that you'd never think of is because there's so much shit all over the place. You have these lineups that you can do. You just remember, right, it's that third little railing in off here, and it's off in this angle. And in 1.6, essentially, that wouldn't exist. There weren't the extra details in that respect. Now, the people who made these maps at the beginning of CSGO can't have known that, right? They just put all this stuff in there. Is it something, do you think that level design is it something that you were aware of, that you kind of, there needs to be some stuff like that for people to actually, bizarrely, for the competitive scene to sort of hook onto?
I think about that stuff all the time. All the time. That's a huge deal. Like, I don't think people really grasp the extent to which art and design are synonymous in CSGO.
Okay. When you're actually making a map, do you ever yourself think like this could be a smoke angle here, or they could use that? Is that something you actually actively think about? Because obviously, like I'm saying, in the original Counter-Strike, when no one designed it for 5v5, for example, no one could really have known how useful certain things like that would be. So I can understand why it wasn't a consideration back then.
Yes, I think about it all the time. And it's not just that, you know, we have to think about as level designers. We have to think about, you know, there's this concept in theme park design called a weenie. And basically what that is, you know, you've got a wall, okay, and it's at a certain height. And above that, you have, you know, just to analogize to Disney, you have the big castle, or beyond that, you have the Epcot, you know, dome. or you have the tree that they do at the Animal Kingdom. So these are things you have to think about as well. And the reason that the parks do that, and the reason that it's so effective, is because it guides people. It's a navigational cue. So you have to think about navigation of maps. You have to think about gameplay considerations, such as the height of walls to allow smoke grenades to be thrown over. How are those players going to line those smoke grenades up? There's endless detail that I could go into about the considerations that happen simultaneous to art and design.
Okay. So when you made Santorini, which is, one of the most recent maps that you've been involved in, and it's a map that, again, when it was released, I mean, I remember some people actually were playing in a matchmaking, etc. Like, some people were giving it a try. When I asked the question before about Crown, like, has the ship sailed? Like, will it ever be, like, in competitive play? What do you think the disconnect is for Santorini? I mean, it sounds like, from the story of the maps as you've created them, you feel like you've learned from your mistakes, you're improving, you're figuring some of these things out. So, has Santorini been a success in your eyes?
Well, I think if you look at and I don't have access to all the data and all the metrics that Valve does, but I suspect if I did, it would be a very rosy picture for Santorini. But again, I'm trying not to be, I guess, I'm grateful for all the opportunities I've had in CSGO. I'm grateful for the freedom that the workshop provides. So I will advocate for my projects, but I try not to take it to an obnoxious point, And I think with Santorini, the response from the community has been really positive. All I can say is that I plan on updating the map in the future. I actually was planning on an update recently, but timing is everything in life, and it seemed like the timing maybe was not so great. So yes, I have full confidence in Santorini. I think that basically I just listen to the players. The players seem to like it, so I like it. If players were saying this map sucks, then I would say this map sucks. But players, for the most part, seem quite happy with it.
Was there a core concept or an idea that you came in with that the map came out of?
Yes. I wanted to do a mid that was insane. I wanted to do a mid that was unbelievably epic. So Santorini has a large mid. It's a mid that has a lot of strategy revolving around it. So that was the idea.
And even though you've been fairly cagey about the idea that, like, you don't want to push Valve this way or that way, or who knows what Valve thinks, if it doesn't ever get into active duty, does that not knock on your confidence at all? As in a competitive play use, in the actual map pool of real turn, is that not an issue? Do you have to just make that a secondary consideration? How do you think of it?
I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, if I were you, I'd think it sucks if it doesn't get into competitive play. That would be my end goal, at least, or at least that would be the highest aspiration. On top of, it's obviously great to have people play the map. Like, that's the thing I'll just point out for people listening. You have to understand, it's not like there's only 4 people who make maps and they each made one map and they all get interactive. There's a lot of people who make maps who spend a lot of time and never get fucking played by anyone, and some of them can't even get their friends to play them. So I understand that it's a success just to get people to play them and to even have it in the game, but especially if you've had success with other maps in the past, there has to be a part of you, at least, just for curiosity at a minimum, wonders what would happen. Hey, if this was played by, Fnatic and all these best teams, that has to be an aspiration, right?
No, it's absolutely an aspiration. It's what I work for every day. If Valve had just never told me that I was wasting my time, that this was all a waste of time, I would be quite disappointed. But we have seen Santorini played by professional teams. It seemed to go pretty well to me. I think it was like a 16-14 scoreline. It was a pretty exciting game. I wish it had been cast in English, but that's life, I guess. So overall, I mean, I guess that the appropriate way to answer your question is I've put most of my focus recently onto Sub-Zero, and all these things that you're saying, they do energize me and they do motivate me. And Valve can say no to me for as long as they want, and it's their game, and I will respect it. But I hope that they do listen to the players who maybe want to see a community map pool, or they do want to see an avenue for new competitive maps to enter into professional play. It doesn't have to be 7 maps in the map pool. It could be 3 or 4. You could use a map like Cache to spearhead this initiative. But I do think that there is a creative solution. And just in general, I feel as a community, even when you talk about a new map like Canals, I think in general as a community, we've got to be better and more appreciative of people who are being creative and trying to do new, innovative things in the level design space.
Okay, so what is Sub-Zero?
Sub-Zero is the project that hopefully it will not be my final Counter-Strike map. I love working on Counter-Strike, but I'm definitely putting a lot of my eggs in this basket. It's something that I've spent over a year testing the design alone. It's got all of the lessons I've learned from, working on projects like Cache and Season and Santorini, and also learning from the failures along the way. It's going to be the most professional product I ship as a level designer for CSGO, in terms of everything I've learned as a level designer and an environment artist. So I don't know, it's pretty exciting, but we'll have to wait and see. So ultimately, it's what the players want.
Okay. Do you have any teasers, like something is it like a 3-level map, or is it like something with all horizontal? Do you have any basic teasers you can give people?
Sure. It's going to be the most simple, most classic map I could have made. It's trying to do something so pure and such a classic design element that I've always wanted to pursue. I've always wanted to make my Dust 2 or my Cache. Okay. And that's what this is going to be.
So another factor that controls, obviously, like I pointed out a minute ago, to get into active duty is a success in itself. To get into the game is a success for a level designer. But in terms of maps ever then making the leap over to the competitive pool, first of all, there's not many that have done it that weren't original Counter-Strike maps. And so a primary problem initially is they don't tend to take out maps even that no one likes anymore. They just rework them and bring them back. So, in a sense, funnily enough, I've got a pretty good analogy for this. The complaint could be that it's like if people just remake Ghostbusters or make Ghostbusters 7 rather than making a new movie, Now, if you like Ghostbusters, who gives a fuck, you get a new movie. But if you don't like Ghostbusters, you want a new movie, then you could see why someone might complain that those funds are being used for that. So, is it tough, the fact that there's not a lot of space in the competitive map pool, because we keep this limited number of maps, and if one goes out, one has to come in, and we know if it's a Valve map, at least history tells us so far, it's only going out to come back in another life form.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I was really self-serving, I would say never change the map pool, right?
To keep caching?
Exactly.
Okay.
But that's not how I approach this issue. I think that we do want to see innovation in Counter-Strike. As a level designer, you do want to be innovating and learning new things and solving new problems. And the only way we're going to get there as a community and as individual level designers is if we are open to change and we are optimistic about what the community can do.
What level of control do you actually have once a map is in the competitive map pool? I saw that graffiti was added almost instantly. I don't think it was actually did you actually add it yourself? Did Valve did you have to consult with them to add it?
Yeah. Well, to a certain extent, I think it's an incorrect question. I have as much control as the community is excited about something that I'm doing. If the community, tomorrow I decided we're not going to have a B-bomb site on Cache.
Okay.
That would not fly, So I think Valve is very intelligent. They listen to the community. They gauge whether the community seems interested in something. And if the community is interested in something, then I think they have every interest in promoting that and making it grander than it would have been without their involvement.
So if tomorrow there were 50 Reddit threads that all had 50,000 points, some of the highest threads in the history of Reddit, and they all said, literally, we will hunger strike to death unless you remove that body op wall ban. Would you and would Valve, do you think, be swayed and you could personally change it if you wanted to and update the map?
Well, geez, I'm not sure it would take that much community
I'm just ensuring that, this community really is let you know. It is hypothetical, of course, that for whatever reason, they're really against it, Could you yourself just go and update the map?
Well, I think there's this thing called the forklift that people have been talking about for a few years now, and it's not going anywhere.
Okay.
So I think every once in a while, it's good to just have one element in a map that just trolls everybody. So, yeah.
Okay.
It's a healthy thing.
since you bring up the forklift, right, you didn't design CSGO, so this isn't your fault entirely, but you did implement the forklift. Therefore, I have to ask you a question, which was actually one of the original, I think, good criticisms of CSGO when it came out, which was in CS 1.6, a lot of the maps, when they would have an area with boxes or something blocking it off, it had to be a very simple item. And on top of that, obviously bullets could penetrate a lot more items and walls in 1.6 than they can in CSGO. And in CSGO, you have impenetrable walls and you have impenetrable items. What is your actual feeling on that? Because for people who come from 1.6, their problem is there's sort of a counterintuitive disconnect there where it's like, well, I know the guy's literally standing there. There's a little thing over the side of his face. Can't I shoot through that? But you can't to some degree.
Yeah, I think that's bad. You want design to be intuitive, and you want it to be like, I like wall banging. I think it's a great feature. It's something that's going to be heavily involved in Sub-Zero more than any other map I've worked on. I think it's just a great feature. So yeah, I definitely like wall banging. I think if we went, I didn't play 1.6, so I can't really comment on it in an educated manner. But I think that having shipped 5 CS:GO maps, I think there's still room to do more with that.
So if tomorrow Valve tell you, right, you know what, FMPONE, we don't actually like making CSGO anymore. Can you just take over for a bit? And whether you actually decide to do it or not, or you're just a placeholder. Tomorrow, you could change the forklift so it could be every bullet can get through it except pistols. Would you make it so it could be wall banged more?
I mean, I could do that right now.
You don't want it to then?
It just it's not what I want. It's what the players want. I'm always listening to their feedback. Sure, I might have some ideas about what would be better, but I try to really check those assumptions against what the community is actually interested in.
Okay, so you keep saying that. You listen to the players. Who are the players?
Well, Reddit is a great resource. I have a lot of pros on my Steam friends, and they are very vocal if you've done something to piss them off, which is great. Yeah.
But it's got to be a specific type of player, right? Like a random player in matchmaking, he'll never be able to contact you unless he goes through Reddit or a pro mentions it? No,
absolutely not. My DMs are open. I take feedback from everyone. I will consider your feedback, whether you're the Queen of England or, just a random person on the internet. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. What do you think then? This is like a general question outside of your domain of your maps. So one of the concerns I have is, as you've kind of, very vaguely elucidated about the process of getting a map to Valve and getting it into the map pool and all these sorts of things.
Well, I'm happy to, and there's some things I want to say on that, by the way.
Okay.
But
go ahead then. Tell me some stuff.
Okay. Well, the operations.
Yes.
The operations are very
I remember
important.
those. They used to be good back in the day. Yeah, you're right.
Well, I better be careful.
Okay.
No, what I want to say about this is that maps like Cache, the remake of Cache, would not exist without the operations. And how it basically works is that the operations are how Valve supports the mapping community. So it's very important that people purchase those passes. Otherwise we wouldn't have maps like Cache, Season, Santorini, or any of the other community maps that people like Agency or Black Gold or whatever.
So that's a way that a fan can literally kind of, without contacting you or somehow managing to go to Gabe Newell's house or whatever, this is a way he can directly hint that he likes some of the maps by the operation, play the operation.
Play it, purchase the passes. When a member of the community purchases the passes, the mappers get paid a percentage of the revenue from the sale by Valve. So it's very important that people buy those passes and support the mapping community. Otherwise, we're going to see a decline in not only the quality of the maps that we're going to get, but in the availability. They may just simply not be available anymore.
Okay, is there anything else burning as a topic on that particular issue that you had in mind you wanted to get out?
Well, how did it relate to your original question? I didn't mean to steamroll your question.
Okay, that's all right, mate. Listen, no one's going to fluster me. I always know where I am with the question. So what I was getting to was this. If I'm not just a random fan. I know a decent amount about CSGO and its history. I have a good memory. But if you ask me, I don't even know that I could name a map creator for CSGO that isn't FMPONE, Cached, Volcano. I don't actually think I know the name of another map creator. And as a result, none of them have any profile to where, okay, I could go and try a bunch of maps like you're saying. Hey, I could go try the operations, I could play the maps. Maybe one of them turns out to be fun. But the problem is, I don't know about how you consume media, but for example, with books or movies or music, personally, I like to know who the person is. And then if I know what their vision is and I like something they did, I'm sure this is quite similar for everyone, you follow the next thing they do. So for example, if you tell me you're making a new map, Sub-Zero, I might check it out because of that fact, The problem with a lot of the other guys, I feel like, is they don't have that initial hook, They can have the game, like you're saying, in an operation, and perhaps I could wander across it and find out it was good, but that's a bit more indirect. Is it just the case that the other people, for whatever reason, don't engage with the community in that particular respect? Is there some that I'm just missing, I happen to be ignorant of, like a few big names you can cite of map makers who have talent, and that, especially from the competitive community, maybe one day I could look to their maps to be included?
Yes, I'd say Yanzel is a person you want to keep an eye on. But here's what I would say on this. At MapCore, which is the website where I kind of figured out everything about level design over the years, MapCore is going to be doing some very special things in the very near future, which is not about elevating me, it's about elevating everybody else. So it's kind of a way that, we've been in negotiations for months to make this happen, and it's going to be pretty huge. It's going to be the biggest event of its kind in Counter-Strike history, and that's all about solving the problem that you're bringing up right now.
Okay, so another issue is that, again, because we're all, at least us in the competitive community, we're all working with very limited knowledge. Like, we're not really experts on who the other map makers are, or even, for example, some things you described here, how a map gets in the game, how the creator gets the attention of Valve, how they benefit from it. Another thing we do is, again, we stick with the names we know. So one of the most famous things people say, and it happens every time Valve is thinking about taking a map out, or they do take a map out, is people tell me this all the time. Do you think we should have Tuscan in the map pool? And I have to tell them, well, they actually tried to make that map. It didn't work. They abandoned it. And so as a result, like, unless you or me's going to make it, I'm talking to the random fan here, who's going to make the map and how would it get made in the game? Well, Valve should make it. It's like, Valve doesn't really do that, they don't really just decide to make a map. So what do you think about the general notion of going, like, because this is why I wonder, as a level designer, obviously you're about making new things and making things that work, etc. What do you think about the notion that people essentially, if there are going to be new maps, they don't actually want new maps, they want new old maps, and to go and mine Counter-Strike history and get fucking Militia or some old map and just remake it so that it can be used in CSGO? What do you think of this?
Well, there's no question that nostalgia is a very powerful force. However, it's like, it goes back to that idea of like a community map pool. I mean, I think that's the creative solution to what you're talking about. Okay. And I think it goes back to what we're going to do for MapCore. I mean, the focus really does need to be on new maps. And, I have a lot of respect and admiration for the history of Counter-Strike. I think it's a very rich history. But I do want to see the community treat new maps better, whether it be it from Valve, be it from the community, whoever. I think that the community has got to evolve their understanding of new maps and sort of, become more sophisticated consumers of levels.
So we have the active duty maps. We have, you can just pick Dust 2 as well if you want still, even though that's not around. You can pick all these different maps. Do you think that the competitive community should have its own little curated set of maps, and that's just another option on the screen when making a game?
Well, that's pretty much Valve's idea with the active duty map pool.
Okay.
Like,
I'm not sure they've entirely succeeded on that, but again, that's my own subjective opinion.
That's feedback.
It's feedback to you. Unfortunately, I can't talk to Valve, mate. Not all of us are so blessed.
Hey, they listen to everything.
Yeah, but a man who's in a hermetically sealed, empty room might be listening to everything. But if I'm not in the room with him, doesn't help us, So, and the intention's great. Like, I love that. I love the fact he's open to it. The problem is, how do I chip a little tunnel in there to talk to him? That's my problem in life,
Well, you are talking to Valve. The challenge, okay. and Sal once said this better than I could say it.
Okay.
He said, Valve is always listening. You just don't know that they're listening. And I think that's really the way it works.
Okay, well, I'll avoid obvious comparisons with the Stasi from the 1970s, 80s there, just for the sake of good taste, Okay, so kind of a final conclusion. that I want to the interview.
Sure.
Beyond all of the maps that you've played, beyond anything new that you're working on or something like that, is there a map that, in terms of what you've seen done with the competitive play, is the one that you always go back to? Like, this is the one where it just, like, is this like the holy grail of maps? Is the one at the moment? Has anyone accomplished that?
Well, what do the community play overwhelmingly for over 10 years?
I mean, I assume you mean Dust 2, right?
That's right.
Okay, then let me ask a sub question then, to go to the creator of Sub-Zero. Valve just removed Dust 2 from the competitive play. And in fact, the implication there, now I could be wrong on this, again, the pattern could break, is that they will change Dust 2 and bring it back. So, you know, there's like, essentially they'll have to fuck with the classic to some degree. Now listen, maybe they're geniuses, maybe someone upgrades it and it becomes better and we all say, wow, what a great choice. But what do you think of this, to remove the map that everyone's played, and is, by the way, the iconic map of Counter-Strike?
It is the iconic map of Counter-Strike. I think it's a great move as long as the map, I mean, they'll listen to players. If players come back and say, oh no, you've ruined Dust 2, they will make adjustments. They always are making adjustments to their maps. So I would just say we should have confidence in them. We should be optimistic, but also be honest with them when the map comes out and just tell them exactly what we think.
If Counter-Strike makes so much money, I remember, like, I saw last year, like, the report that showed how much Valve had made of Counter-Strike. It was in a staggering number, especially when you consider how the game didn't really succeed in the very beginning, you know? Actually, maybe it sold to people, but it wasn't being played very much. When you're saying that there is this mechanism there where people can get paid for making the maps, and, you know, they can be reimbursed in this respect, and obviously, even just for skins, the workshop, etc., it's been very important to having a healthy community. Will it ever be the case, if esports gets bigger, like, will that in itself bring in more people making maps? I mean, essentially, it sounds like a weird question, because it's like asking someone, if you know that you get paid hundreds of millions to be the best pop guitarist, would that make you learn the guitar? And I guess in a way, no, because you never know you can be that guitarist. You know, you have to sort of get pretty deep in before you ever turn a dime in that way. But do you think, as that element is explored more, the way of the community giving back and supporting these people, is that in itself going to solve some of these problems of having more maps and having more maps that are interesting and people like?
Well, I hope that the long break between operations does not become a trend, because that goes against everything that you just said.
Yeah.
But assuming that the new operation comes out and it's as we have dealt with in the past and it's very supportive of the mapping community, then yes, I would say the mapping community is where the esports community was 10 to 12 years ago, where in terms of like the workshop community, let's say more broadly. I think that, you know, this is something Valve is heavily invested in. I think companies like Blizzard they're waking up. So, you know, I think that it's a very important aspect of the game's long-term growth to be activating people to be creative around the game.
One thing that's very confusing to me is that when people make games and we judge games on how good they are and how fun the map obviously makes an incredible amount of difference. Like, imagine a game where it was only Cobblestone, for example. Some people fucking hate Cobblestone. People would actually make judgments about the game that have nothing to do with the game. They'd be like, oh, it's shit. You know, like, the corridors are very, you know, they'd have all these weird things in that sense. So one area that I do feel is totally not mined out by almost every game developer I know is that they make the game, and yeah, they do give the tools to make these maps to other people. But I am actually shocked, not just by Valve, but almost every big esports creator, that they kind of don't make more maps, etc. You know, you'd think you'd make 50 maps, 100 maps.
Well, or give the tools to the community. Like, I was extremely disappointed that Overwatch did not do that. I think it's a huge oversight, and the lack of urgency to do that is mind-boggling. But yeah, it's just a huge opportunity. It's all it is an opportunity. So are you going to take the opportunities, or are you going to not take them?
Okay. Do you have a final message at the end of the interview, or someone you want to thank or say hello to?
Thank you to everyone who has supported the workshop community over the years, including myself. Thank you for all the freedom creatively that we have. And thank you. Thank you for the interview.
I'm Device from Australia, and welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's a joke-free zone.